The February snow had blanketed London in a silence, broken only by the distant tolling of church bells, when the renowned scientist, Professor Nathaniel Blackwood, arrived at Baker Street, carrying a brass candlestick, whose flame had been burning continuously for 73 days without consuming any visible fuel, without diminishing in brightness, and without any apparent source of combustion, bringing with him a mystery that would prove to be one of the most scientifically impossible and ultimately tragic cases Sherlock Holmes ever investigated. Holmes, who had been conducting experiments with various combustible materials and studying the emerging field of thermodynamics as part of his research into methods of arson and fire-related crimes, work that would prove unexpectedly relevant to our investigation, looked up with immediate fascination as our visitor entered, carefully shielding the burning candlestick from drafts, despite the apparent impossibility that any natural wind could extinguish a flame that had defied all known laws of physics for over 2 months. Professor Blackwood was perhaps 60 years old, a distinguished chemist and physicist who had spent 4 decades teaching at Cambridge and conducting groundbreaking research into energy and matter, but now his scientific rationalism was shattered by a phenomenon he could neither explain nor accept, and the candlestick he carried represented either the greatest scientific discovery of the century or the most elaborate deception ever perpetrated against the scientific establishment. Before I continue with this most extraordinary case, please subscribe to Detective Sherlock if you haven't already. Your support helps us bring these mysteries to life. Like this video, hit the notification bell, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let us proceed with the bewildering mystery of the candlestick's eternal flame. "Mr. Holmes?" he began, his voice carrying the measured tones of academic precision now edged with desperate confusion. "I come to you with something that violates every principle of physics and chemistry. I have spent my life studying and teaching. This candlestick has been burning continuously since December 1st, 73 days ago, without any discernible fuel source, without consuming the candle that sits in it, without generating the heat that combustion necessarily produces, and without any mechanism I can identify that would sustain the flame. I have subjected it to every test I can devise. I have consulted with colleagues across Europe. I have examined it with the most sophisticated instruments available to modern science. The flame continues burning, impossibly, inexplicably, in defiance of everything we understand about energy, combustion, and the physical world. I need you to solve this mystery before it destroys my scientific credibility, my sanity, or both." Holmes approached the candlestick with intense scientific curiosity, studying the flame that danced atop the brass holder, with no apparent source of fuel. The candlestick itself was an elegant piece, perhaps 8 inches tall, made of brass with ornate decorative patterns suggesting 18th century craftsmanship. Set in the holder was what appeared to be a standard white candle, and at its tip burned a bright, steady flame, approximately 1 inch high. A perfectly ordinary-looking flame, except for the impossible fact that it had been burning for 73 days without consuming any wax. "Remarkable," Holmes murmured, examining the flame from multiple angles without touching the candlestick. The flame appears completely normal in color and behavior, yellow with hints of blue at the base, flickering slightly in air currents, radiating heat as combustion should produce. "Yet you say the candle shows no signs of consumption?" "None whatsoever," Professor Blackwood confirmed. "I have measured the candle's dimensions daily with precision instruments. It has not decreased in height or mass by even a fraction of a millimeter. The flame burns, producing light and heat, yet consuming nothing. This violates the fundamental law of conservation of energy. Energy cannot be created from nothing, yet this flame generates light and heat continuously, without any fuel source being depleted." I leaned closer to examine the phenomenon, my medical and scientific training immediately recognizing the impossibility of what I was observing. Could there be a hidden fuel source, gas being fed through the candlestick holder from below, or some chemical process generating combustible material? I considered every possibility, Blackwood replied. I have X-rayed the candlestick to examine its internal structure. It's solid brass with no hollow chambers or hidden mechanisms. I tested the surrounding air for combustible gases, none detected. I analyzed the candle itself. Standard paraffin wax, with no unusual chemical additives. I even placed the entire apparatus in a sealed glass chamber and monitored it continuously for days. The flame continued, burning, despite the chamber's atmosphere becoming depleted of oxygen to levels that should make combustion impossible. This flame burns without fuel, without oxygen, without any physical mechanism that known science can explain. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his analytical mind clearly working through the implications and possibilities. Professor Blackwood, tell me how you came to possess this candlestick. Where did you acquire it? From whom? And under what circumstances did you first observe the eternal flame? Blackwood settled into a chair, clearly relieved to tell his story to someone who would take the mystery seriously. I acquired the candlestick 74 days ago, one day before the flame began burning, from an antiques dealer in Bloomsbury named Mr. Cornelius Webb. I had been browsing his shop, looking for interesting items to study for my research into historical scientific instruments, when I noticed this candlestick among a collection of 18th century brass work. Webb told me it had come from the estate of a deceased collector, a gentleman named Lord Ashford, who had maintained an extensive collection of unusual objects and curiosities. The candlestick was sold to me for a modest price. Webb seemed eager to be rid of it, mentioning that it had brought nothing but trouble to Lord Ashford's household. What kind of trouble? Holmes asked sharply. Webb was vague about details, but he mentioned that Lord Ashford's servants had been frightened by the candlestick, claiming it was cursed or haunted. Apparently, Lord Ashford himself had become obsessed with it shortly before his death 3 months ago. He died of apoplexy, quite suddenly, while examining the candlestick in his study. His heirs wanted nothing to do with the collection and sold everything off as quickly as possible. I dismissed the superstitious nonsense about curses. I'm a man of science, not prone to believing in supernatural phenomena, and purchased the candlestick for my collection. And when did the eternal flame first appear? I asked. The following evening, Blackwood said. I had placed the candlestick on my laboratory workbench, intending to examine it more carefully the next day. I had not placed any candle in it. The candle you see now came with the candlestick, but I had removed it for separate analysis. That night, I was working late in my laboratory when I noticed a light I hadn't turned on. I looked up and saw that the candlestick sitting empty on my workbench had a flame burning where the candle should be. Not a candle burning, mind you, but a flame apparently emerging from the empty socket itself. I was startled but intrigued. Assuming some chemical residue in the brass had ignited, I approached to examine it more closely, and as I did, the flame seemed to pull the candle, which I had set aside several feet away, through the air toward itself. The candle flew across my laboratory and inserted itself into the candlestick socket, and the flame settled atop it in the normal position you see now. Holmes and I exchanged significant glances. Professor, you're describing a phenomenon that suggests not just impossible combustion, but impossible motion. Objects moving through the air without physical force applied to them. Are you certain about what you observed? Could there be alternative explanations for the candle's movement? I'm a trained scientist, Mr. Holmes, Blackwood said with some defensiveness. I know how to observe phenomena accurately and eliminate confounding variables. I watched that candle move through empty air and insert itself into the candlestick with no physical contact. It was as if the flame itself exerted attractive force on the candle, pulling it into position. Since that moment 73 days ago, the flame has burned continuously without consuming fuel, and several times I have attempted to remove the candle from the candlestick. Each time, it resists removal as if held by powerful magnetism, though neither brass nor paraffin should be magnetic. When I finally do force it free, The flame continues burning in the empty socket until I return the candle, at which point the flame transfers back to the candle top. This description suggested technology or forces far beyond anything I had encountered in my medical practice or my years with Holmes. Yet Professor Blackwood was clearly a rational, credible observer, not prone to superstition or hallucination. Either something genuinely extraordinary was occurring, or we were dealing with an exceptionally sophisticated deception. Holmes approached the candlestick again, this time examining it with his magnifying lens, studying every detail of its construction and surface. The craftsmanship is indeed 18th century, he observed, but there are some unusual features. See here, Watson. These decorative patterns are not merely ornamental. They form geometric shapes that appear to have mathematical significance. And here, around the base, there are tiny inscriptions in what looks like Latin or possibly Greek. He produced a notebook and carefully copied the inscriptions, then consulted various reference texts from his shelves. After several minutes of research, he looked up with a troubled expression. These inscriptions are from medieval alchemical texts, specifically references to perpetual motion and the philosopher's stone. The geometric patterns match diagrams from Renaissance-era books on perpetual lamps and eternal flames. This candlestick was designed, or at least decorated, to suggest alchemical properties. Are you suggesting this is some kind of alchemical device? I asked skeptically. Surely you don't believe in medieval alchemy, the transmutation of elements, the philosopher's stone, perpetual motion machines. All of that was debunked centuries ago. I believe in evidence, Watson, Holmes replied. And the evidence before us is a flame that has burned for 73 days without fuel. Whether that's achieved through genuine alchemical principles, through undiscovered physics that medieval alchemists accidentally stumbled upon, or through some sophisticated modern deception designed to appear alchemical, that's what we must determine. Over the following days, Holmes conducted one of the most intensive scientific investigations of his career, treating the eternal flame as both a criminal mystery and a scientific puzzle. He began by thoroughly examining the candlestick itself, using every analytical technique at his disposal. Chemical analysis of the brass revealed an unusual composition, standard copper and zinc alloy, but with trace amounts of rare elements that Holmes couldn't immediately identify. The brass itself showed no signs of modern manufacture. The oxidation patterns and wear were consistent with genuine 18th century metalwork. Yet, embedded within the brass structure were microscopic particles of what appeared to be crystalline material, unlike anything in Holmes's extensive collection of mineral samples. This crystalline material is key to understanding the phenomenon, Holmes explained after days of analysis. It's distributed throughout the brass in a pattern that follows the decorative geometric designs visible on the surface. The crystals appear to have unusual electromagnetic properties. They respond to magnetic fields in ways that standard minerals don't, and they seem to emit faint radiation that my instruments can barely detect. Could these crystals be the fuel source for the eternal flame? I suggested. Perhaps they contain stored chemical energy that's being released slowly over time, sustaining the combustion. Possibly, Holmes acknowledged. But if so, the energy density would be extraordinary, far beyond any known fuel. To sustain a flame for 73 days, and counting, would require enormous energy, yet the crystals constitute only minute traces of the candlestick's total mass. We're talking about energy density orders of magnitude beyond anything in conventional chemistry. Holmes also investigated the candle itself, conducting similar detailed analysis. The candle appeared to be ordinary paraffin wax with a standard cotton wick. Chemical testing revealed no unusual compounds or additives. Physical measurements confirmed Professor Blackwood's observations. The candle's dimensions and mass remained absolutely constant, despite the continuous flame. Whatever was burning, it wasn't the wax. The flame generates light and heat, Holmes observed. Yet the wax shows no melting, no consumption, No chemical change. The wick is equally unchanged. It doesn't char or shorten as wicks normally do during combustion. This suggests the visible flame is not actually burning the candle at all, but is instead a manifestation of some other process that produces light and heat without chemical combustion. The most puzzling aspect was the flame's behavior when the candle was removed from the candlestick. As Professor Blackwood had described, attempting to remove the candle met with strong resistance, as if the candle were held by powerful attraction to the candlestick socket. When Holmes finally managed to pull the candle free, using considerable force, the flame continued burning, but not on the candle. Instead, it burned in the empty socket of the candlestick, a flame with no visible fuel source at all, hovering in mid-air above the brass holder. "This is impossible according to every principle of physics," I said, watching the sourceless flame dance in empty space. Flames require fuel to burn. They're the visible result of exothermic chemical reactions, combustible material combining with oxygen and releasing energy as heat and light. A flame burning with no fuel violates thermodynamics, violates chemistry, violates our fundamental understanding of how the physical world works. Yet here it burns, Holmes replied quietly, which means either our understanding is incomplete, or we're observing something that isn't what it appears to be. Professor Blackwood has verified through rigorous scientific testing that the phenomenon is real and not simple trickery, but that leaves us with two possibilities. Either we've encountered genuine perpetual motion and energy creation from nothing, which would revolutionize science and physics, or we're dealing with technology so advanced that it appears magical to our current understanding. Holmes's investigation expanded to researching the candlestick's provenance and history. He visited the antiques dealer Cornelius Webb, who confirmed Professor Blackwood's account of purchasing the item from Lord Ashford's estate. Webb added disturbing details about the candlestick's history. "Lord Ashford acquired that cursed thing about a year before his death," Webb explained. "He purchased it from a private collector in France who specialized in alchemical artifacts and supposedly occult objects. Ashford was fascinated by it. He believed it was a genuine perpetual lamp created by medieval alchemists who had discovered secrets of energy that modern science had lost. He spent months studying it, trying to activate its properties, becoming increasingly obsessed with unlocking what he called the eternal flame of the ancients." "And did he succeed in activating it?" Holmes asked. "I don't know for certain," Webb replied, "but his servants reported strange phenomena in the final weeks before, his death lights appearing in his study when no lamps were lit, objects moving without being touched, unusual heat emanating from the candlestick, even when no flame was visible. Lord Ashford himself became erratic and fearful, claiming the candlestick was exerting some kind of influence over him, that it was showing him visions of alchemical knowledge beyond human comprehension. His final words, spoken to his valet moments before his fatal apoplexy, were reportedly, 'The flame demands a price. All eternal things demand eternal payment.' This ominous statement suggested that the candlestick might be more dangerous than its apparently benign eternal flame suggested. Holmes investigated Lord Ashford's death more carefully, obtaining medical records and interviewing the physician who had attended him. Lord Ashford died of what appeared to be massive stroke or apoplexy, the physician reported. But there were unusual aspects to his condition that I noted in my private records, though not in the official death certificate. His body temperature at death was several degrees higher than normal, not feverish exactly, but as if he had been subjected to intense heat from an internal source. And there were unusual burn patterns on his hands and face, not severe burns, but subtle tissue damage, consistent with long-term exposure to moderate heat, as if he had been holding something hot for extended periods. "Did you notice any connection between these symptoms and the candlestick found in his study?" Holmes asked. At the time, no, the candlestick was simply one item among many in Lord Ashford's collection of curiosities. But thinking back, I do recall that the candlestick was positioned on his desk very close to where his body was found, and his hands were extended toward it as if he had been reaching for it when the apoplexy struck. If I were speculating wildly, I might suggest that whatever killed Lord Ashford emanated from that candlestick. Holmes thanked the physician and returned to his investigation with new urgency. If the eternal flame is not merely a scientific curiosity, but an active danger, then Professor Blackwood may be at risk. We need to determine the mechanism behind this phenomenon, and if possible, extinguish the flame before it exacts the same eternal payment from Blackwood that it apparently demanded from Lord Ashford. But extinguishing the flame proved as impossible as explaining it. Holmes attempted every method he could devise, smothering it with glass jars that sealed out oxygen, dousing it with water and chemical suppressants, subjecting it to powerful air currents, even attempting to break the candlestick itself to disrupt whatever mechanism sustained the flame. Nothing worked. The flame continued burning, apparently indestructible, impervious to all conventional methods of fire suppression. This flame is not sustained by conventional combustion, Holmes concluded after exhaustive testing. It exists through some other mechanism, either a continuous energy source we haven't identified, or a phenomenon that merely appears as flame but is actually something entirely different. We need to understand the underlying principle before we can stop it. Holmes consulted with experts across multiple scientific disciplines: physicists, chemists, electrical engineers, even some researchers exploring the emerging field of radioactivity. Each examined the eternal flame and the candlestick, conducting tests and measurements, proposing theories and hypotheses. The consensus was bafflement. The phenomenon violated known physics, yet it clearly existed. Hundreds of hours of observation and testing confirmed the flame burned continuously without consuming fuel. This is either the greatest scientific discovery since electricity, one physicist declared, or the most sophisticated hoax ever perpetrated. I can't explain it through any known principle of physics, yet I can't identify any mechanism of trickery that would produce the observed effects. It's genuinely impossible, yet genuinely real. Professor Blackwood, meanwhile, was deteriorating physically and mentally under the strain of dealing with the eternal flame. He had kept the candlestick in his laboratory, continuing to observe and measure it compulsively, and the extended exposure seemed to be affecting him in ways similar to what had befallen Lord Ashford. I feel drawn to it, Blackwood confessed to Holmes during one examination session. I find myself standing before the flame for hours, mesmerized by its unwavering light, feeling as if it's communicating something beyond words, knowledge, or power, that I'm on the verge of grasping, if I can just understand it properly. I know this sounds like the ravings of Lord Ashford before his death, that I'm becoming obsessed just as he was. But the flame is real, Mr. Holmes. It's teaching me things, showing me patterns and principles that conventional science has overlooked. The eternal flame isn't just perpetual combustion, it's a window into higher physics, into understanding energy and matter at fundamental levels we haven't even imagined. I examined Professor Blackwood medically and found concerning symptoms. His body temperature is elevated, his pulse is rapid, and there are early signs of the same burn patterns Lord Ashford exhibited: tissue damage from prolonged exposure to moderate heat. Professor, you must distance yourself from the candlestick immediately. Whatever this phenomenon is, it's harming you physically and possibly affecting your mental state. I can't abandon it, Blackwood insisted. This is the most important scientific discovery of my lifetime, possibly of any lifetime. If I can understand the mechanism behind the eternal flame, I'll revolutionize physics, prove that energy can be created from nothing or accessed from dimensions beyond our normal perception. The price of such knowledge is worth any personal cost. Holmes recognized the same obsessive conviction that had apparently consumed Lord Ashford, and he acted decisively. Professor Blackwood, you are suffering from what I believe is a form of radiation poisoning or electromagnetic influence from the candlestick's unusual properties. The crystalline materials embedded in the brass are emitting radiation that affects human physiology and psychology when exposure is prolonged. This isn't mystical influence, it's a physical effect, but it's dangerous nonetheless. I'm removing the candlestick from your possession immediately for your own safety." Blackwood resisted, arguing that abandoning the research would be scientific cowardice, that understanding the eternal flame was worth any risk. But Holmes was adamant, and with my support, we forcibly removed the candlestick from Blackwood's laboratory and transported it to Baker Street, where Holmes could continue investigating it under more controlled conditions while preventing Blackwood's continued dangerous exposure. At Baker Street, Holmes established strict protocols for examining the eternal flame, limiting exposure time to no more than 30 minutes per session, maintaining careful distance from the candlestick, except when absolutely necessary for testing, and monitoring ourselves for any symptoms of the physiological and psychological effects that had afflicted Lord Ashford and Professor Blackwood. "Whatever the mechanism behind this flame," Holmes explained, "it clearly exerts influence beyond simple light and heat. The radiation or electromagnetic emissions from the crystalline material affect human tissue with prolonged exposure, causing physical damage and possibly altering brain function in ways that create obsessive thoughts and false perceptions of receiving revealed knowledge. Lord Ashford died from this influence, and Blackwood was well on his way to similar fate. We must solve this mystery while protecting ourselves from the same danger." Holmes's breakthrough came from an unexpected direction, not from analyzing the candlestick itself, but from researching the history of perpetual lamps and eternal flames in alchemical literature. He discovered references to similar devices created in the medieval and Renaissance periods, described in obscure texts as perpetual lights or philosopher's lamps that could burn without fuel through principles that combined early chemistry with what we would now call physics. The medieval alchemists didn't understand their own discoveries, Holmes explained after days of research. They stumbled upon principles of radioactivity and electromagnetic energy centuries before modern science would rediscover them. They worked with minerals containing radioactive elements, materials that emit energy continuously through atomic decay, which would have appeared to create light and heat from nothing. They crafted these materials into objects like this candlestick, creating what seemed to be perpetual flames powered by energy sources they couldn't understand and described in mystical rather than scientific terms. "So the eternal flame is sustained by radioactive decay?" I asked. "The crystalline material in the brass is radioactive, and its emissions are somehow being converted into visible flame. More precisely, the emissions are creating plasma ionized gas that glows with light and heat but isn't actually combustion in the chemical sense. The flame we see isn't burning anything. It's a plasma discharge sustained by radioactive emissions from the embedded crystals. That's why it doesn't consume fuel, why it continues indefinitely, and why conventional methods of extinguishing it don't work. You can't smother plasma discharge with lack of oxygen. It's not a chemical reaction that requires oxygen, and the radioactive source will continue emitting energy for decades or even centuries, making the flame effectively eternal from human time perspective. "But if the flame is radioactive plasma," I said with growing alarm, "then prolonged exposure would indeed cause radiation poisoning, exactly the symptoms Lord Ashford and Professor Blackwood exhibited. We've been handling and studying a radioactive source without proper protection." Holmes nodded grimly. "Which is why we must shield it immediately and limit all further exposure. The medieval alchemists who created these objects didn't understand radiation. They would have seen the perpetual light as miraculous, while slowly dying from radiation exposure, attributing their illness to moral or spiritual causes, rather than physical poisoning from their own creation." Using lead sheets obtained from a plumber's supply, Holmes constructed a shielded container for the candlestick, blocking the radiation while still allowing observation of the flame through a small viewing window. Once properly shielded, the danger of exposure was greatly reduced, though Holmes insisted we continue limiting our observation sessions and monitoring ourselves for symptoms. With the immediate danger addressed, Holmes turned to the question of what to do with the candlestick. "This object is scientifically valuable. It's evidence that medieval alchemists achieved a form of perpetual light through radioactive materials, centuries before Curie and Becquerel would formally discover radioactivity. but it's also extremely dangerous. In ignorant hands or with prolonged exposure, it causes radiation poisoning that killed Lord Ashford and would have killed Professor Blackwood. We cannot simply return it to circulation where others might suffer the same fate. Should we destroy it? I suggested. Break the candlestick and dispose of the radioactive material safely. Destroying the candlestick might release the radioactive crystals in powder form, creating even greater danger, Holmes replied. And from a scientific standpoint, the object has historical and research value that argues against destruction. No, I believe the appropriate solution is to donate it to a scientific institution with proper facilities for handling radioactive materials. Somewhere it can be studied under controlled conditions while being kept away from the general public. Holmes contacted the Royal Society and explained the situation, providing detailed documentation of the candlestick's properties, the dangers it posed, and the historical and scientific significance of the object. After review by their most senior fellows, the Society agreed to accept the candlestick for their collection, housing it in a specially designed shielded display where it could be observed and studied safely. Professor Blackwood, who had recovered his physical and mental health after being separated from the candlestick's influence, was both relieved and disappointed by this outcome. "I'm grateful you saved my life, Mr. Holmes. I was following the same obsessive path that killed Lord Ashford, and I would have met the same fate if you hadn't intervened. But I regret losing access to such a remarkable scientific phenomenon. The eternal flame revealed glimpses of physics beyond our current understanding, or at least it seemed to. Perhaps those revelations were radiation-induced hallucinations rather than genuine insights." "Perhaps," Holmes agreed. "Or perhaps the radiation did genuinely alter your perception in ways that allowed you to intuit principles of physics that are normally beyond human awareness. Radiation affects the brain's electrical patterns. It's conceivable that certain radiation exposures could enhance or alter consciousness in ways that access different modes of understanding. But if such knowledge comes at the cost of inevitable death from radiation poisoning, the price is too high. Better to advance science slowly through safe methods than to gain revolutionary insights while dying from the source of those insights." The case was closed with the candlestick safely deposited with the Royal Society, where it remains to this day in their secure collection, still burning its eternal flame behind lead shielding, a testament to medieval alchemical achievement and a reminder of the dangers inherent in manipulating forces not fully understood. The publicity around the case was carefully managed to avoid panic about radioactive materials while still documenting the scientific significance of the discovery. A sanitized account was published in scientific journals, describing the candlestick as a historical example of pre-modern radioactive technology without emphasizing the dangers it posed or the deaths it had caused. "We must balance public awareness with public safety," Holmes explained to the journal editors. "People need to know that radioactive materials exist and can be dangerous, but we don't want to create panic about mysterious radiation in everyday objects." The candlestick is now safely contained. There's no immediate public danger, so detailed accounts of its lethal effects serve no purpose except to frighten people unnecessarily. For me, the case represented a troubling intersection of ancient knowledge and modern science, where medieval alchemists had accidentally discovered principles they couldn't understand and created objects that appeared magical while being lethally dangerous. The eternal flame wasn't supernatural, I reflected, but it might as well have been from the perspective of those who created it. They crafted something that violated their understanding of nature, a flame that never died, a light that needed no fuel. To them, it must have seemed like captured divine fire, proof of their mystical theories. They couldn't have known they were working with radioactive materials that would slowly poison them even as they marveled at their creation. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. That's the tragedy of the candlestick. It represents genuine human achievement, a real discovery of perpetual energy through radioactive decay, but discovered by accident in an era that couldn't properly understand or safely utilize the finding. If the medieval alchemists had possessed modern knowledge of radiation and proper shielding, the candlestick could have been studied safely and might have advanced science by centuries. Instead, it became a mysterious and dangerous curiosity that killed those who examined it too closely. Its true nature hidden by mystical interpretations that obscured the physical reality. The case influenced subsequent treatment of historical scientific artifacts, particularly those from alchemical and early chemistry periods, when dangerous materials were often handled without proper understanding of their hazards. Museums and collections began testing historical objects for radioactivity and other hazards, discovering several other examples of medieval and Renaissance artifacts that contained radioactive materials incorporated for their luminescent properties. The candlestick was not unique, one museum curator reported after conducting systematic testing. We've identified several historical objects, luminous paints, glowing minerals, perpetual lamps that contain radioactive materials. Our predecessors didn't understand radiation, so they handled these materials casually, often suffering health consequences they attributed to other causes. We must retroactively shield these objects to protect both the public and researchers from dangers that previous generations didn't recognize. This systematic identification and protection of radioactive historical artifacts became a priority for museums and scientific collections worldwide, preventing future cases similar to Lord Ashford's death and Professor Blackwood's near-fatal obsession. The candlestick case had revealed a category of danger hiding in plain sight within historical collections, objects that appeared innocuous or merely curious, but which posed serious radiation hazards to anyone who handled or extensively studied them. Professor Blackwood continued his scientific career, though he never again worked directly with the eternal flame candlestick. I'm content to study it from the published accounts and the Royal Society's documentation, he explained. The direct experience nearly killed me, but it did teach me valuable lessons about the dangers of obsessive pursuit of knowledge without proper safety precautions. Science requires both curiosity and caution, either without the other leads to disaster. Years later, when I visited the Royal Society's collection, I was able to view the candlestick through its shielded display. The eternal flame still burned, a bright, steady light that had now been continuous for over a decade, powered by radioactive decay that would continue for centuries. The flame appeared completely ordinary, just a small bright point of light atop a brass candlestick. But knowing its true nature, understanding the physics behind its perpetual burning and the dangers it posed to unwary observers, transformed it from curiosity into profound symbol of human knowledge and its often dangerous pursuit. The plaque beside the display read, "Perpetual lamp, circa 1750. This brass candlestick contains radioactive minerals that create a self-sustaining plasma discharge, appearing as an eternal flame that burns without fuel, created by unknown alchemists who accidentally discovered principles of radioactive luminescence centuries before modern science. Warning: radioactive material. Do not handle." Simple words that concealed an extraordinary story of accidental discovery, dangerous obsession, multiple deaths, and eventual scientific understanding. The eternal flame had been explained, contained, and preserved for study, no longer a mystery, but a documented example of pre-modern radioactive technology. Holmes occasionally referenced the case in his writings about the intersection of crime, science, and the unknown. The candlestick's eternal flame appeared to be a supernatural phenomenon, he wrote, but investigation revealed it as a natural process, using principles unknown to those who created it and misunderstood by those who later encountered it. This exemplifies how the apparently impossible often proves to be merely the not yet understood. The detective and the scientist share a common obligation: to pursue understanding without prejudice, to test hypotheses rigorously, and to accept conclusions wherever evidence leads, even when those conclusions challenge prevailing assumptions. The case also illustrated the importance of recognizing when investigation itself posed danger, Not all mysteries can be solved safely, Holmes noted. The candlestick required careful protocols to study without being harmed by radiation exposure. Lord Ashford died because he investigated without understanding the danger. Professor Blackwood nearly died for the same reason. We survived because we recognized the hazard and implemented appropriate protections once we understood the mechanism. The lesson is that investigation must balance curiosity with caution. Some truths are dangerous to uncover without proper preparation. For the broader public, the case became a minor sensation, reported in newspapers as the eternal flame mystery or the candlestick that burns forever. Public fascination focused on the seemingly magical perpetual flame, with less attention paid to the scientific explanation or the dangers involved. Many people missed the point entirely, treating the case as supernatural occurrence, despite Holmes's detailed scientific explanation. The public prefers magic to physics, Holmes observed wryly. We explained that the eternal flame is radioactive plasma discharge sustained by atomic decay, and people nod politely, then continue referring to it as if it were captured supernatural fire. The truth is actually more remarkable than the supernatural interpretation that medieval craftsmen accidentally discovered radioactive luminescence and incorporated it into decorative objects. But most people find physics less emotionally satisfying than mysticism. This public preference for mystical over scientific explanations frustrated Holmes, but didn't surprise him. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures who prefer narratives with meaning and purpose over random natural processes, he said. A flame that burns eternally through divine power or alchemical magic fits human psychological needs better than a flame sustained by random atomic decay with no purpose or meaning beyond physics. Science reveals how nature works, but it often strips away the meaning and purpose that humans crave. That's why supernatural explanations persist. Even when scientific alternatives are available, they provide psychological comfort that pure physics cannot. Despite public misunderstanding, the scientific community recognized the case's importance. The candlestick became a teaching example in physics and history of science courses, demonstrating how radioactivity was discovered twice, once accidentally by medieval alchemists who couldn't understand their finding, and again deliberately by modern scientists with proper theoretical framework to interpret the phenomenon. The candlestick proves that discovery is not merely finding new phenomena, but understanding them properly, one physics text noted. The medieval alchemists discovered radioactive luminescence, but lacked the theoretical framework to recognize what they had found. They attributed it to mystical principles and created dangerous objects without understanding the hazards. Only when modern science rediscovered radioactivity with proper theoretical understanding could the phenomenon be safely studied and productively applied. The candlestick's eternal flame burned for centuries as a mystery before finally being explained, a testament to how long the gap between discovery and understanding can be. The case remained one of Holmes's most scientifically significant investigations, bridging eras and disciplines, connecting medieval alchemy to modern physics, and demonstrating how apparently impossible phenomena could be explained through rigorous scientific investigation. The eternal flame that had seemed to violate natural law was revealed as a natural process using principles unknown when the object was created, not magic, but science from a future era, accidentally discovered by past investigators, couldn't properly understand their finding. The candlestick itself continued burning its eternal flame, now safely shielded and properly understood, a bridge between human ambition and human understanding, between accidental discovery and deliberate science, between the mysteries of the past and the knowledge of the present. Years after the initial investigation, Holmes received an unexpected letter from a French antiquarian who had been researching the history of alchemical artifacts. The letter contained remarkable information about the origins of the eternal flame candlestick and similar objects. "Monsieur Holmes," the letter began, "I have read with great interest the accounts of your investigation into the perpetual lamp, now housed at the Royal Society in London. My research into medieval and Renaissance alchemical workshops has uncovered documentation suggesting these objects were created by a specific group of craftsmen working in Prague in the mid-18th century, during the final flowering of practical alchemy, before it gave way entirely to modern chemistry. The letter went on to detail the discovery of workshop records from an alchemist named Johann Faust. No relation to the legendary figure who had operated a laboratory in Prague from 1740 to 1760. Faust's records described experiments with luminous earths obtained from mines in Bohemia and Saxony, materials that glowed with inner fire and could be incorporated into objects to create perpetual lights that burn without consumption of fuel. Faust believed he had discovered the secret of capturing elemental fire. The French researcher explained what he called the pure essence of combustion, separated from material fuel. He didn't understand that he was working with radioactive minerals, likely pitchblende, or similar uranium-bearing ores from the uranium-bearing ores mining regions. He ground these minerals into powder, mixed them with molten brass during casting, and created objects like your candlestick that appeared to burn eternally through what he thought was alchemical principle, but was actually radioactive decay. The records indicated that Faust had created perhaps 20 such perpetual lamps over his career, selling them to wealthy collectors across Europe who prized them as demonstrations of successful alchemy. Each lamp was unique, incorporating different amounts of radioactive material and different designs to channel and display the luminescence. The letter continued. Faust died in 1762 at age 50. 7 of what his physician described as wasting sickness, almost certainly radiation poisoning, from years of handling radioactive materials. His workshop was abandoned, his remaining inventory scattered, and knowledge of how he created the perpetual lamps died with him. Holmes shared this information with Professor Blackwood and with the Royal Society, providing historical context for the candlestick and explaining why multiple similar objects might exist in various collections across Europe. This suggests we should conduct systematic search for other Faust perpetual lamps. Blackwood said, if 20 were created and sold to collectors, most are probably still in existence somewhere in private collections, museums, or family estates, potentially exposing people to radiation without their knowledge. Holmes coordinated with the Royal Society and with antiquarian societies across Europe to locate and test potential Faust perpetual lamps. Over the following year, 7 additional examples were identified, each exhibiting the same eternal flame phenomenon and testing positive for radioactive emissions. All were properly shielded and either donated to scientific collections or provided with protective enclosures if remaining in private hands. This systematic recovery effort may have saved numerous lives. Holmes reflected after the project concluded. Each of these lamps was a radiation source capable of causing serious harm with prolonged exposure. By identifying them, testing them, and either shielding or recovering them, we've prevented future cases like Lord Ashford's death and Professor Blackwood's near-fatal obsession. The discovery of Faust's workshop records also prompted broader research into other alchemical and early chemistry practices that might have involved radioactive materials. Historians and scientists collaborated to identify dangerous historical artifacts, creating protocols for safely handling and storing items from periods when radiation wasn't understood. The candlestick case opened our eyes to a category of hazard we hadn't properly considered. One museum director explained, historical scientific artifacts from the pre-modern era could contain all sorts of dangerous materials, not just radioactive minerals, but also toxic chemicals, unstable compounds, and other hazards. We now approach such collections with appropriate caution, testing before handling, documenting hazards, and implementing safety protocols that previous generations wouldn't have thought necessary. This shift in museum and collection practices represented one of the case's lasting legacies, awareness that historical objects weren't merely inert artifacts to be preserved and displayed, but could pose active dangers requiring scientific assessment and proper safety measures. Professor Blackwood, meanwhile, had turned his experience with the eternal flame into research on the psychological effects of radiation exposure. My obsession with the candlestick wasn't merely intellectual curiosity, he explained in a published paper. The radiation was directly affecting my brain function, creating compelling but false sense of revelation and special knowledge. This raises troubling questions about how many historical figures who claimed mystical insights or special knowledge might actually have been experiencing radiation-induced neurological effects. His research documented cases of alchemists, mystics, and early scientists who exhibited symptoms consistent with radiation exposure, physical deterioration, obsessive behavior focused on particular objects or substances, claims of receiving revealed knowledge, and eventual death from wasting illnesses. Many of these historical figures worked with radioactive minerals without knowing it. Blackwood concluded their mystical experiences and claimed revelations may have been neurological effects of radiation exposure rather than genuine spiritual or intellectual insights. We must consider the role of environmental toxins, including radiation, in shaping historical accounts of mysticism and discovery. This research opened new perspectives on history of science and religion, suggesting that some mystical and revelatory experiences might have physiological rather than supernatural origins. This doesn't necessarily invalidate the experiences. Blackwood was careful to note, radiation-induced altered consciousness is still real consciousness, and insights gained during such states might still be valid even if their origin is neurological rather than divine. But it does suggest we should be cautious about attributing special meaning to experiences that might have straightforward physical explanations. The candlestick itself became something of a pilgrimage site for scientists and science enthusiasts who visited the Royal Society specifically to view the eternal flame. Behind its lead shielding, the flame continued burning year after year, decade after decade, a visible demonstration of radioactive decay and a reminder of the long arc of scientific discovery. "It's humbling to observe," one visiting physicist remarked. "That flame has been burning continuously for over a century now, powered by atomic processes that will continue for millennia. It connects us to the medieval alchemists who first created it, to the Victorian investigators who finally explained it, and to future scientists who will still be studying it long after we're gone. The eternal flame is aptly named. It's eternal not through magic, but through physics, which is somehow more profound." Holmes visited the candlestick occasionally in the years after the case, checking on its status and reviewing the Royal Society's ongoing documentation of the phenomenon. On one such visit late in his career, he brought me along to see the flame we had investigated decades earlier. "It looks exactly the same," I observed. "The flame hasn't changed at all since we first examined it. For us, decades have passed. We've aged. The world has changed enormously, but the eternal flame continues unchanged, indifferent to human timescales. That's the essential nature of radioactive decay," Holmes replied. "It proceeds at rates determined by atomic structure, completely independent of human observation or desire. The flame will continue burning long after everyone who knew about our investigation is dead, long after even the Royal Society itself might cease to exist. It's a rare example of something genuinely eternal from human perspective, not metaphorically eternal, but actually lasting beyond any human time frame." We stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the small, bright flame that had been the center of such dramatic investigation years earlier. The mystery had been solved, the danger had been contained, the phenomenon had been explained. Yet something about the eternal flame remained compelling, not supernatural mystery anymore, but natural wonder, a visible manifestation of atomic processes that revealed deep truths about matter and energy. "Do you ever wonder," I asked Holmes, "whether the medieval alchemists were right in some fundamental way? They claimed to be pursuing eternal truths about matter and transformation. Modern chemistry proved most of their specific theories wrong. There's no philosopher's stone." The case also prompted Holmes to reflect on the nature of impossibility and how investigation should approach apparently impossible phenomena. "When I first saw the eternal flame," He told a gathering of young detectives years later, "I was confronted with something that violated known physics, a flame burning without fuel, continuing indefinitely without any apparent energy source. I could have dismissed it as trickery or refused to investigate something that contradicted scientific law. Instead, I examined it carefully, gathered evidence systematically, and ultimately discovered that it wasn't violating physics but revealing physics we hadn't properly understood. The lesson is that when you encounter the apparently impossible, your task isn't to dismiss it, but to investigate until you understand it, because impossibility often means incomplete understanding rather than genuine violation of natural law. This methodological principle, investigating rather than dismissing the apparently impossible, became a cornerstone of Holmes's teaching and influenced subsequent generations of detectives and scientists. The impossible is usually just the not yet explained became a maxim associated with Holmes's approach to investigation. Professor Blackwood, in his later years, often spoke publicly about his experience with the eternal flame, using it as a cautionary tale about obsession and the dangers of pursuing knowledge without proper safeguards. "I became convinced the candlestick was revealing special knowledge to me," he would explain. "I felt I was on the verge of understanding revolutionary principles that would transform physics. But that feeling of special revelation was radiation-induced neurological effect rather than genuine insight. I was being poisoned, and the poison was creating compelling but false sense of enlightenment. If Mr. Holmes hadn't intervened, I would have died like Lord Ashford, convinced to my final breath that I had accessed profound truths, when in fact I was simply experiencing the neurological effects of radiation exposure." These public lectures helped demystify the eternal flame while educating people about radiation hazards. "The candlestick is remarkable, but not magical," Blackwood emphasized. "It's a historical artifact that demonstrates real physics radioactive luminescence that was accidentally discovered centuries before being properly understood. It's dangerous because radiation harms human tissue, not because of mystical curses or supernatural properties. Understanding the real nature of the hazard is essential for protecting ourselves from it." The case also influenced literature and popular culture, inspiring stories about ancient secrets, forbidden knowledge, and the dangers of obsessive investigation. Several novelists used the eternal flame as inspiration for Gothic tales of cursed objects and deadly mysteries. Holmes was generally dismissive of these fictionalized accounts. "They miss the point entirely," he complained after reading one such novel. "The candlestick's significance isn't that it's cursed or forbidden, but that it represents genuine human achievement. Medieval craftsmen discovering radioactive properties through experiment and incorporating them into functional objects. The danger is physical radiation, not supernatural curse. But fiction prefers mysticism to science, supernatural menace to natural hazard. It's frustrating to see a remarkable story of scientific discovery transformed into supernatural melodrama. Despite Holmes's frustration, the popularized accounts did serve to make the eternal flame case widely known, even if details were often distorted in fictional retellings. The candlestick became famous, attracting visitors to the Royal Society who wanted to see the mysterious perpetual lamp for themselves. "We've had to implement timed viewing sessions," one Royal Society curator explained. "The candlestick has become our most popular exhibit. People queue for hours to spend a few minutes observing the eternal flame. Most don't understand the physics behind it. They simply find the perpetual burning mesmerizing and vaguely mystical. But if their interest in the candlestick leads even a few visitors to learn more about radioactivity and atomic physics, perhaps the popularization serves a useful educational purpose." As years passed and the candlestick continued its eternal burning, it became less a mystery and more a monument, a physical artifact connecting multiple eras of human understanding, from medieval alchemy through Victorian investigation to modern physics. Each generation approached it with different knowledge and different questions, but the flame continued unchanged, a constant against which human understanding could be measured. Holmes's final recorded comment about the case came late in his life, during an interview about his most memorable investigations. The eternal flame was significant, not because it was the most dangerous case or the most complex mystery, but because it demonstrated how investigation can transform impossibility into understanding. We began with a phenomenon that violated known science, a flame that burned without fuel. We ended with a explained, documented, safely contained example of radioactive luminescence. The journey from impossible to understood was the essence of investigation, confronting the unknown with patience, rigor, and determination until it becomes known. The interviewer asked whether Holmes regretted that explaining the eternal flame had removed its sense of wonder and mystery. Holmes's response captured his philosophical approach to investigation and knowledge. Understanding doesn't diminish wonder, it transforms and deepens it. When the flame was mysterious, it inspired supernatural speculation and fearful reverence. Now that we understand it as radioactive plasma discharge, it inspires awe at atomic physics, respect for the medieval craftsman who accidentally discovered it, and appreciation for the scientific method that finally explained it. The flame is no less wondrous for being understood. Its wonder has simply changed from the supernatural to the natural, from fear-based mysticism to knowledge-based appreciation. That transformation from mystical fear to scientific understanding represents progress, not loss. This philosophical position that understanding enhanced rather than diminished wonder reflected Holmes's fundamental optimism about human knowledge and investigation. He believed that every mystery solved revealed new depths to explore, that understanding always opened more questions than it closed, and that the universe studied scientifically was more wondrous than any supernatural alternative. The eternal flame continued its endless burning, now for over a century since Professor Blackwood first brought it to Holmes's attention. The radioactive materials powering it would continue decaying for millennia, sustaining the flame for time frames beyond human history. Future generations would study it with tools and theories not yet developed, adding their own layers of understanding to the accumulated knowledge of previous investigators. The candlestick had been many things: an alchemical achievement, a deadly obsession, a scientific mystery, an investigation challenge, an explained phenomenon, a teaching tool, a historical monument. Through all these transformations in human understanding and use, the flame itself remained constant, burning bright, eternal, indifferent to human interpretation, sustained by atomic processes that would continue long after everyone who had ever observed or studied it had passed into history. In this sense, the eternal flame was aptly named, not because of supernatural properties or mystical significance, but because radioactive half-lives extended beyond human timeframes, making the flame effectively eternal from human perspective. The medieval alchemists who created it, the Victorian investigators who explained it, and future scientists who would continue studying it were all temporal observers of a phenomenon that transcended individual human lives and even civilizations. The case of the candlestick's eternal flame remained one of Holmes's most philosophically significant investigations, a mystery that transformed from impossible to understood, from supernatural to natural, from dangerous obsession to safely contained knowledge. It demonstrated the power of rigorous investigation to explain the apparently inexplicable, the importance of proper safety protocols when studying unknown phenomena, and the deep connection between human curiosity and human danger. The flame burned on, eternal witness to human efforts to understand the natural world, silent testimony to the long arc of scientific discovery, constant reminder that the universe contained wonders both natural and profound that rewarded patient investigation with explanatory understanding. The mystery had been solved, but the flame's wonder endured, transformed from mystical fear to scientific appreciation, from impossible phenomenon to understood physics, from dangerous curiosity to safely studied monument. And so the eternal flame continued its endless burning, now properly understood as radioactive luminescence rather than alchemical magic, safely shielded behind lead rather than dangerously exposed, a bridge between medieval discovery and modern understanding, between human ambition and human achievement, between the mysteries of the unknown and the satisfaction of the explained. The candlestick that had consumed Lord Ashford's life and nearly claimed Professor Blackwood's had been tamed through investigation and understanding. Its flame still burned eternal, but no longer posed danger to those who observed it with proper knowledge and precautions. The case was closed, the mystery was solved, the phenomenon was explained, and the eternal flame continued burning, a lasting testament to both the power of human curiosity and the importance of scientific understanding in transforming dangerous mystery into safe knowledge. Holmes occasionally visited the candlestick in his final years, standing before the shielded display and observing the flame that had once been such a profound mystery. "It looks so ordinary now," he remarked during one such visit, "just a small bright flame, easily explained by modern physics. Yet it represents something extraordinary human achievement across centuries, the accumulation of knowledge, the transformation of mystery into understanding. The flame hasn't changed, but we have. We understand it now, in ways the medieval alchemists never could, in ways even we couldn't when we first encountered it. That growth in understanding is what makes investigation worthwhile, not just solving individual mysteries, but contributing to humanity's expanding knowledge of the natural world." The eternal flame burned on, unchanged by observation or understanding, sustained by atomic processes that would continue long after all human observers had passed into history. But the human understanding of that flame had been transformed from mystical wonder to scientific knowledge, from dangerous obsession to safely studied phenomenon, from impossible mystery to explained achievement. That transformation from unknown to known, from mysterious to understood, from dangerous to safe, was the essence of investigation, the goal of science, and the lasting legacy of Sherlock Holmes's involvement with the candlestick's eternal flame. The mystery was solved, the case was closed, and the flame continued burning eternal testimony to human curiosity, human achievement, and human understanding, gradually illuminating the darkness of the unknown.